Thank you for joining us for our conversation with our featured poets, Kathy Park Hong and Carolyn Randall Williams. My name is Nayang Amy Kwan. I'm a professor in the Department of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies and the director of the Asian American and Diaspora Studies program, which was established at Duke University in 2018. I've highlighted the date 2018 to point out our belated institutional beginnings after decades of student activism. The fight for ethnic studies programs like ours has a much longer history that goes way back to the civil rights movement of the late 1960s, led by the Black student activists in coalition with Asian American and other minority students and their allies. This was in the midst of a global decolonization movement and anti-Vietnam War activism. Today, we find ourselves at yet another crossroads of an inflection moment of reckoning in our nation's history. In the past few years, we have been working to build partnerships and collaborations with allies from across the university and beyond, such as the Duke University Center for Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, the Department of African and African American Studies, the Samuel Cook Center for Racial Equity, Duke Black Alumni, and many others. Some of them and others are co-sponsoring this event, and I will have a brief opportunity to thank more of our sponsors at the end of the event. It is in this continued spirit of alliance building that we have invited two renowned American poets to engage us and with one another in a much anticipated and timely conversation on the state of the nation as we are reeling from the double pandemic of the COVID virus and the viral spread of racism and racial polarization all around us. Rather than let this devastating moment debilitate us, we take cues from the national and global movements for racial reckoning and direct our energies on the essential role of the engaged artist and the arts to help us move our divided and isolated communities together. Several of us on the organizing team have also found great solace in the powerful writings of tonight's featured poets in helping us cope with these troubled times. Both of the poets have been actively engaging with some of the most pressing issues affecting our communities in this pandemic. As we know, communities of color have been disproportionately impacted, and 1 in 1,000 African Americans are dead. The majority of those who have lost their jobs and income are of Black and Brown communities who are overrepresented in precarious and service sectors. Thousands of small and family-owned businesses are shut down, many in immigrant communities, including Asian American businesses that are not being tracked or counted in the polls or reported. We have also seen a staggering spike in anti-Asian violence and hate speech. All of this in the context of a persistent pandemic of anti-Black racism in this country. While communities of color, especially Black and Asians, have historically been divided and often been pitted against one another, we hope that the onslaught of trauma that our communities are disproportionately experiencing, of course, each in very different ways, may be harnessed to create a space for empathy and to begin to imagine new ways of coming together as we move forward toward a new future. And now I'd like to introduce Carolyn Randall Williams. Hi, Carolyn. Carolyn Randall Williams is a multi-genre writer, educator, and performance artist who lives in Nashville, Tennessee, where she's a writer in residence at Vanderbilt University. In her words, she has attended two of the oldest and richest universities in the world, Harvard and Oxford, and has taught and lived in two of the poorest states in the country, Mississippi and West Virginia. Her work has been published and featured in various publications, including the New York Times, the Iowa Review, and the Massachusetts Review. In praise of her staggering New York Times op-ed piece, "You Want a Confederate Monument? My Body is a Confederate Monument," a raving journalist says, quote, "It is written in the emotional power of poetry with precise prose. That is at the same time excruciatingly painful and brilliantly illuminating. It is the most powerful piece of writing about the Confederate monuments that I have ever read. Deeply shocking, deeply painful." Now I'd like to introduce Kathy Park Hong. Hi, Kathy. Kathy Park Hong is the poetry editor of the New Republic and is a professor at Rutgers New York University. Her prose and poetry can be found in news outlets such as the New York Times, New Republic, and The Guardian, among others. Her recent interview on the rise of anti-Asian racism in the pandemic is in The Guardian. In praise of her latest book of creative nonfiction, which was published this past spring, a reviewer raves, quote, "A formidable new essay collection. I read Minor Feelings in a fugue of enveloping recognition and distancing flinch. Kathy Park Hong is writing in agonized pursuit of a liberation that doesn't look white, a new sound, a new affect, a new consciousness, and the result feels like what she was waiting for." Tonight's conversation will be moderated by my esteemed colleagues, Duke professors Patrice Douglas and Esther Kim Lee. I'd like to introduce Professor Douglas. Hi, Patrice.
Hi, everyone.
Patrice Douglas is a professor in the Department of Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies. She's currently writing her book, Engendering Blackness, The Political Ontology of Sexual Violence, which examines the history of sexual violence under slavery. I'd also like to introduce Professor Esther Kim Lee. Hi, Esther.
Hi.
Esther Kim Lee is a professor of theater studies who specializes in theater history and dramatic criticism with special focus on Asian American theater, Korean diaspora theater, and globalization. She's the author of the award-winning book, A History of Asian American Theater, among many other publications. Finally, a quick word on today's event format. Each poet will read selections from their own works, and then we will have a moderated conversation followed by questions from the audience. If you have a question, please drop them in the Q&A box below. We've also gathered questions in advance from registrants. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Kathy to the spotlight.
Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here at Duke. And I'm also really thrilled to share this Zoom platform with Caroline Randall Williams. I'm a big fan, and that article is just killed me. It was just so incredible. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with you. So I thought actually, I'm not going to read poetry. I thought I would read from Minor Feelings because there's an essay in here that kind of addresses Black Asian relations. It's actually an essay about Richard Pryor and my obsession with Richard Pryor. But I'm not going to read my analysis of Richard Pryor, my obsession with Richard Pryor. I'm going to actually talk about sort of I'm going to talk about some of the conclusions I drew from listening to him. And then I'm also going to read a little bit about the LA riots. In Pryor, I saw someone channel what I call minor feelings, the racialized range of emotions that are negative, dysphoric, and therefore untelegenic, built from the sediments of everyday racial experience and the irritant of having one's perception of reality constantly questioned or dismissed. Minor feelings arise, for instance, upon hearing a slight, knowing it's racial and being told, "Oh, that's all in your head." A now classic book that explores minor feelings is Claudia Rankine's Citizen. After hearing a racist remark, the speaker asks herself, "What did you say?" She saw what she saw, she heard what she heard, but after her reality has been belittled so many times, she begins to doubt her very own senses. Such disfiguring of senses engenders the minor feelings of paranoia, shame, irritation, and melancholy. Minor feelings are not often featured in contemporary American literature because these emotions do not conform to the archetypal narrative that highlights survival and self-determination. Unlike the organizing principles of a Bildungsroman, minor feelings are not generated from major change, but from lack of change, in particular structural, racial, and economic change. Rather than using racial trauma as a dramatic stage for individual growth, the literature of minor feelings explores the trauma of a racist capitalist system that keeps the individual in place. It's playing tennis while Black and dining out while Black. It's hearing the same verdict when testimony after testimony has been given. My term minor feelings is deeply indebted to the theorist Sienna, who wrote extensively on the affective qualities of ugly feelings, negative emotions like envy, irritation, and boredom, symptomatic of today's late capitalist gig economy. Like ugly feelings, minor feelings are, quote, non-cathartic states of emotion with, quote, a remarkable capacity for duration. Minor feelings occur when American optimism is enforced upon you, which contradicts your own racialized reality, thereby creating a static of cognitive dissonance. You are told things are so much better while you think things are the same. You are told Asian Americans are so successful while you feel like a failure. This optimism sets up false expectations that increase these feelings of dysphoria. A 2017 study found that the ideology of America as a fair meritocracy led to more self-doubt and behavioral problems among low-income Black and Brown sixth graders because, as one teacher said, quote, they blame themselves for problems they can't control. Minor feelings are also the emotions we are accused of having when we decide to be difficult. In other words, when we decide to be honest. When minor feelings are finally externalized, they are interpreted as hostile, ungrateful, jealous, depressing, and belligerent affects ascribed to racialized behavior that whites consider out of line. Our feelings are overreactions because our lived experiences of structural inequity are not commensurate with their diluted reality. I'm going to skip ahead here. I was born in Koreatown, Los Angeles, and raised there in my early childhood before we moved to the West Side. Even after we moved, my family's social and business transactions all took place in K-Town. This is where my father used to work, where we went to church, where my family's doctors, grocers, hairstylists, and acupuncturists were located. K-Town was home to me in the way the West Side was not, because I took it for granted. It's too familiar. As I try to think of distinctive features to describe that neighborhood, my mind glides over K-Town's flat, treeless topography of strip malls and utility poles unsnagged. While K-Town is now gentrifying, whites used to avoid it because of the crime, because there is nothing to look at but Koreans and Latinos, because it is absent of any touristic ethnic charm. Even the Hangul signs are as rigid and right-angled as Legos. Traffic overwhelms the low-lying rows of barbecue restaurants, saunas, and churches whose sans serif crosses are a blight on the skyline like satellite dishes. If I were to describe minor feelings as a sound, it would be the white noise of whooshing traffic in that area, of life passing me by so that I felt even more bereft. Now, I am protective of K-Town's homeliness because it is where I'm from. But then we also moved out early on, which puts into question my sense of ownership. When the 1992 LA riots happened, my family lived nowhere near the area. Although my father eventually became successful, we were the exception. Every family I grew up with struggled. Small businesses failed, families went bankrupt, divorce, mental illness, and alcoholism afflicted almost everyone I knew. I was frustrated when Nicholas Kristof cheerily wrote an op-ed in 2015 about wholesome Asian family values. They gave us an economic Asian advantage because he was yet another white authority who gaslit my reality. My father's best friend, or family dentist in Koreatown, was a thin, narrow-faced man with a twangy Busan accent. He never used enough Novocaine and slipped the drill into my gums enough times that I flinched just thinking about him. When I had my hemifacial spasm, the dentist said he would fix it. He flipped open a medical textbook and asked me if I've ever been in a car accident where my back was dislocated. No, I haven't. I'm sure you have. The dentist died a bitter alcoholic. His first wife divorced him, taking all his money, so he had to sell his practice. His second wife divorced him after only a week of marriage. Finally, he married his nurse, his third wife, whose own grown daughters were not allowed into their home because he was a petty and jealous man. Even after he was diagnosed with liver cancer, the dentist never stopped drinking, and his wife nursed him until the end. For her devotion, he left her nothing but a mountain of debt. Another friend of my father's owned a men's sauna and rented out the stairwell to a Korean shoe shiner. In 2008, during the housing crisis, the sauna owner lost all of his savings. He raised the rent on the shoe shiner and refused the man's pleas that he couldn't afford the rent. One day, the shoe shiner paid a visit to the sauna owner in his office and shot him dead. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. After my brief experiment with stand-up, I tried to write a novel about my hometown during that week in spring 1992. But upon drafting the first few chapters, I became trapped by the coming-of-age storyline. Given enough time and research, I might have written that novel, but I felt constrained using the voice of an adolescent girl who didn't know enough because I didn't know enough. I was too young then. It was a crisis that swirled around me rather than cut through me. And yet the riots have weighed on my conscience as a crucible of race relations that this nation failed. Even if I wasn't actually involved, I regard that time with equal parts guilt and rage. But in the end, I could not make sense of it through the narrative. Through narrative, I didn't have it in me to fictionalize the Black community who despaired over the acquittal of those police officers, nor even the distraught Korean woman who stood on a crate blocking the entry of her store from a crowd of looters screaming, "This is America." As much as I am a masochist, I am also a sadist, which is what attracted me to stand up. If I was going to embarrass myself, I wanted the audience to feel embarrassed for me, so embarrassed that they'd want to leap out of their skins. In my search for an honest way to write about race, I wanted to comfort the afflicted, but more than that, I wanted to afflict the comfortable. I wanted to make them squirm in shame, probably because I too identify with the comfortable. But I had nothing to show for this search, but a trail of failed forms. I'll stop there.
Don't stop. Oh my God. It's transcendent, Kathy. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I am in just sort of terrific admiration of you and your work. I was taking notes while you were reading. You know, the line you said about white authority that gaslit your reality just struck me. And I literally was just saying to students yesterday that I think the relief of this time has been a sort of cessation of a certain kind of national gaslighting. For better or worse, at least it's being dragged into the light and being acknowledged for what it was and is and has been. And I will also say, just on a note, because I just feel crazily privileged to be in this space with all of you. My parents divorced when I was very little, and besides my mother, my primary parent figures were my Japanese godparents. And my first snack that I ever brought to class was I brought with chopsticks because we just visited my godparents in Tokyo, and I was like doubly othered, but I just was certain that all of the white kids were wrong for being confused about both my Blackness and the chopsticks simultaneously. So it's very precious for me to get to gather in this exact space at this moment. I just want to underscore that. And so the poems that I have brought for this evening, some of them are from Lucy Negro Redux, and then some of them are new. I'm about to read you one that is brand new this summer and hasn't actually even been sent out yet. But all written in the spirit of wanting to afflict the comfortable, and stick it to anybody who's trying to impose white authority that gaslights anyone's reality. This poem is called Syrinx Calls Herself to Arms, and it's about the nymph Syrinx. For those of you who are familiar with classical mythology, who, in trying to escape Pan, fled to the river and called on her fellow nymph sisters to help her. And so they turned her into reeds by the river. And he was so enraged that she'd become a patch of reeds that he cut her down and made a flute out of her. And then that's where we get Pan pipes. So anyway, Syrinx calls herself to arms. My bow of wood, my bow of horn, of dogwood, of cornelian cherry was different from Diana's. They mistake me. They still mistake me. Some women all look alike, with the bows and the horns, the rich promise atwixt our legs. Imagine carrying the promise of your body in your belly, a promise that any man could think the world made just to him. His promise in my body a pipe, my body a flute to be blown and mouthed and held and sounded at his pleasure. My own gifts a reedy silence without a man's mouth, without some man's wind. What golden bow, what good my bow of wood, the word for weapon. Let me make me an instrument for my own salvation. Make me a fruit that I might nourish myself. Make me a wind that I might sound my own note. So that first one's my call to arms for all women together. And then this next one is a peculiar in some ways to Black womanhood poem, but also more sticking it to the white male authority that when it makes itself manifest irresponsibly can just create chaos as the world lives throughout the centuries. This poem is called Other Ways to Say Blackface. Take the cork, he said. We were out walking. It made me feel free, he said. I stopped walking. I said, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. Take the cork. Do you mean blackface? Yes, that's right, he said. It's natural to want to be different, to want to feel free. Oh, white boy. Oh, Lord. Oh, tell me, sir. Yes, tell me how you want to feel free. Oh, boy, here on my street, tell me, do I make you free? Am I your new black face? I mean, my black face next to yours. My black mouth on your mouth. Does that free you from your trim white body like that cork do? Am I just your little thick, black, sweet corkscrew? You know how it works, he said. After your parents have opened the bottle of wine, take one and burn the bottom. Take one, I said. One what? I said. Oh, the cork, I said. Oh, right. Oh, white boy. Oh, Lord. Oh, the street fell away. I'd let you put your hands on my body in both of our wanting. And now you say blackface, and you say free, and you look at me and you say natural, and then you say free again and burn the bottom. And before I can conjure your young white hands with a match burned cork, smudging your face till it feels black and free. I am afraid. of how much you don't know. And I am afraid of how much I can stand. Oh, white boy. Oh, Lord. Oh, take your cork, put it back in the bottle, stop up everything left of that strange nostalgia. Stop looking to feel free in my skin. Give it back to me without the burn, without the cork. My skin looks to you like the freedom your skin is. This next poem is called Which Lives Matter, and I wrote it after the Parkland shooting, but I wrote it because it applies to everything. From the LA riots to the present, I think it speaks for itself. Which lives matter? They found the shooter and arrested him without incident. They found the shooter and arrested him without incident. They found the shooter and arrested him without incident. They found the shooter and arrested him without incident. They found the shooter and arrested him without incident. They found the shooter and arrested him without incident. They found the shooter and arrested him without incident. They found the shooter and arrested him without incident, and arrested him without incident, and arrested him without incident. Okay, so I think I just have two more for you guys. Then I want to talk to Kathy because that's the most exciting part of this evening for me. So this poem is called To All the White Girls Who. So thank you in the audience if you're prepared to hear this, making people feel uncomfortable. And it's for every colored girl who's ever felt alien in her own body from a white gaze. To all the white girls who made me feel ashamed of my body, who made me feel confused about how and why I exist in your space. I hope you have lived in fear of this poem. I hope you have been afraid I would name you and shame you. You did me such violence. You didn't mean, you meant, girl, you mean. I mean, whether you meant to or not, you made me a murderer of my tiny colored girl joys. They could not gain purchase in your smoothly white space. I killed pieces of myself to survive you, and now you are listening. You want to learn. You see me. You hear me. So here, I say, resurrect my pieces, gal, or get your lesson. I do not care who you are now. I cannot stand you to survive the world without some record of your hateful gaze. It's simple. Your children should know you carelessly hurt colored people. And hey, if you raise them right, they might think less of you. But listen, I don't know how to want to wish you well. So I'm going to pivot for the last poem, which is a poem from my poetry collection, Lucy Negro Redux. I'm going to share one that is a unifying, sustaining poem of solidarity in all forms of womanhood. And the opening phrases, this exeat saith that, are just a sort of hat tip to the Bridewell Prison Records Standard Form, which I did a great deal of research with in England when I was doing my work for this book, in which I imagined that Shakespeare had a Black girlfriend, and that's why he wrote lines like, if hairs be wires, black wires grow from her head, and then will I swear that beauty herself is black, and all they foul that thy complexion lack, about the dark lady from his sonnets. Lucy's exeat saith that. This exeat saith that I am wild, and that I live by it, and that I like it. Like the money, and the witness, and the grotesque, and the yes, yes. This exeat saith that I am not a partridge or a ruby, I am a potato, a beetroot, not a precious bird or jewel, but a dirt-dug tube. Wrestle me, rub me all over, and I will muddle your interiors with flecks of brown earth. You will sigh at your soiled hands, and then you will put them in your pockets to pay for it. This exeat saith that you will come again to scour my body with your worthy emollient palm creases, because I am that round, strange, colored victual. And further, this examinate saith that you will dirt grit your nails to gather me up, and by God, we will both be sustained. By God, if you warm and eat me, I will nourish and fatten you. All right. I am sending it back to Amy now.
Hi, Carolyn. It's me, Patrice. I'm
Oh,
taking.
hi, Patrice. Sorry, I'm sending it to you.
Okay. No worries. That was beautiful. I mean, both of those readings were really captivating and gripping in particular ways. I actually almost forgot that I was coming on because I was really into that last poem, like emotionally and physically, like really feeling it. I'm like, oh, it's my turn.
Good. That's the ideal circumstance.
Absolutely. Feeling the poems is what we want to do, right? So I'm going to take the lead on starting us with our moderated discussion between Kathy and Carolyn. And my colleague Esther will also join in. We'll sort of oscillate between questions. Most of these questions are broad enough for both of you to chime in and answer and have that conversation with one another. And so I want to start us off by saying, Kathy, I really like the way that you describe failures in your work, specifically attempting to write the novel about the 1992 Los Angeles rebellions and not being able to because you weren't at the place of learnedness where you could engage those histories in a way that really dealt with and respected the dynamicism of them. And then also your time trying to be a stand-up comedian. And I was wondering, considering both of you have been tremendously successful at your ventures, but I want to know if you can talk about your failures and how failed projects or diverted paths have taught you lessons that you carry in your creative processes.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for that question. And Caroline, that was also a transcendent reading. I just loved it. It was really great. Wonderful to hear you read, and I want to just absorb it longer. But failure, God, I don't even know where to start. I think I think as an Asian person, Asian people, I mean, maybe like my family, I have I used to have sort of this abject fear of failure, because I think when I was growing up, you didn't have a choice. There was no choice where you could fail, because if you failed, there was no safety net, there was no security net. The way my parents grew up and the way they sort of raised me was to always sort of look forward, and like the goalposts were always moving. It's just like a certain way of growing up, I guess, that I try not to, foist onto my own daughter. But I think, but I've learned to really embrace failure. I think like failure is a shadow, always shadows you if you're a poet, if you're any kind of writer, if you're in any kind of creative field, because it's just so, it's just really, it's hard, you know, a lot of it is just like, what's a quote, like 90% sweat and, you know, it's just hard work and talent, but a lot of it is just luck that gets you, that pulls you through. But I think failure is important because it's the quickest way to learn. And also it's so important to take risks, you know, like I think like to use this statistic or this little test where is a little story or whatever you call it, this anecdote about where they had two classes, pottery classes. And the class, there was one class where they were like, okay, we just want you to throw a pot, like make a pot every day. And then for the other class, they were like, okay, we're gonna have just 2 assignments throughout the class. So you're just gonna make 2 pots. So the other class who were just supposed to make 2 pots were just agonized making the perfect pot. And then at the end of the class that ended up having the coolest, most interesting pot were the ones who just kept at it and just failed and failed and failed and failed. And then that, you know, so, and that's how they became more comfortable in their artistic practice versus them on the other group that was trying to kind of, you know, perfect, you know, so. But I would love to hear Caroline answer that question.
I love, gosh, I think that the pot metaphor, I mean, it's not even a metaphor. It's a literally people trying and failing at pots, but I think it applies more universally. The pot anecdote, I should say. I was thinking about it differently before you said that, but it really boils down to the question, still comes back to what my first thought was, which was about fear of failure and how it's framed, you know, just personally, and then certain kinds of cultural expectations, and whether, like, you know, failure is not an option because it's to do with honor or to do with integrity or to do with, you know, in my family and in certain kinds of, in certain, you know, broadly speaking, in many Black families, I know this because I've got many friends where, you know, we say one thing and you're like, oh yeah, everybody's nodding and saying they heard grandma say it. You know, there's something about the question of failure as, you know, the necessity of, or I guess I'm putting it in conversation with the question of the necessity of excellence. And in my family, the necessity of excellence was always sort of put in the context of, or they'll kill you, right? Like, if you're not excellent, you'll die. If you're not excellent, the system will eat you because of these structures, right? And so I think that the question of, and I think that, you know, attached to that is this notion that these systems were built for us to fail, which I shouldn't even say it with those fingers because they really were in a lot of ways. And so I don't know, I think that, and then I'll also say that I think my failures have been freeing, the places where I've failed. And then it's made me feel like, okay, now I know that that's not for me. And I was raised to think I needed to try to be excellent at everything. And so the failures have been freeing in that way. And I also think that failure can be galvanizing. The masochist in me, you know, kind of goes, oh, I failed at that. Now I've got to become excellent at it. I think failure is a tool, I guess, is what I would say. Failure is a tool. It's a tool and it's a character. Mm-hmm. It's a character, it's an antagonist that you need to create drama.
And can I just add to that? I think like when you first asked that question, I was kind of gathering my thoughts, and but I love what you said actually, Caroline, about failure being a a tool, because it is, it's like, it's actually kind of like, it's a tool to getting to where you need to, not that we
Yeah,
need to be goal oriented, um, but how, you know, in terms of like stand up, which by the way, I didn't actually try to do stand up. It wasn't serious. It was just like, we're talking about masochism. It was just like a masochistic part of my life where I was like, where I really hated doing poetry readings. And I'm like, all right, instead of doing poetry readings, I'm going to just do stand up, because I felt like a failure. Every time I went up on stage and read poems, I just constantly felt like a failure. And I think when I started doing stand up, I was like, well, at least if I did stand up, I'm deliberately failing. And somehow that made it better. It somehow made me feel better. And I was just thinking about what it is. And stand up is, failure is always a tool. It's always a tool to getting better at being funny. And I think I'm wondering, and I was like thinking, like, what is it about the creative field, arts, that make failure so scary? And I think part of it is because you need an audience, you know, in some aspect. There's always this sort of not craven, but abject need for approval from an audience. And with stand up, it's like the audience is in the room. You need, for a joke to work, the audience has to laugh. So it's just, so that dependency is all that, so much more, it's transparent, you know? And so I think I appreciated that transparency versus poetry, where it's like a lot of poets will just go on about how they don't care about audience and how they don't care about approval and so forth. But it's masking a lot of insecurity and insecurity in that they actually do want approval. But I think also, coming from my family, a lot of it was when you are seeking approval and you fail to get that approval, you feel humiliated. And the sense of humiliation or shame is this exposure. It's a sense of exposure that you feel. And I think that was what was really just hard for me, because I think I also grew up where exposing yourself in any way was considered absolutely taboo. You couldn't do that, you know, exposing your family secrets, exposing your feelings, exposing how you're actually not that good at stand up or poetry and so forth. And so, because I had this debilitating fear of being exposed in that way, it felt it that much worse. I was so neurotic about it. And then I was like, well, if I need, I need to, if I need to overcome this fear, I have to just fail deliberately again and again. And it was really frightening and horrible, and horrible for the audience too. But I got an essay out of it, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, thank
No,
you.
go ahead,
It
Esther.
was so wonderful to hear you read your essay and your poems. I've been spending a lot of time reading your pieces, and having you actually sound them out, sound your words out. It was so powerful. Maybe because I'm in theater, I just love things performed, and just to really hear your voices and to feel energies. I really appreciate it. So I'm wondering about the form of writing, different forms of writing. Both of you write poems as well as essays. And Kathy, your book has been described as part memoir, part cultural criticism. And Carolyn, your op-ed piece in the New York Times is both autobiographical as well as a critical study of US history. So I wonder what you think about this kind of differences in different writing forms, and whether one form of writing lends itself to a particular kind of set of thoughts and feelings that another form might not. And particularly in discussions of race, is one form a better way to go, especially when you're thinking about a broader audience? So that's really an open question about I guess kind of in a more specific way, as poets, how do you approach essays, and when do you write poems as well as more something that's more autobiographical? Caroline, you're
Happy
muted.
to take it
Yeah.
first. I'm happy for you to go first. I don't want to throw it at you again first if you don't, if you don't want the
I
first.
thought maybe you wanted, since I spoke last, you wanted
Okay,
to.
great. No, I'm happy to.
Yeah.
So for me, the first thing, it's a testament to how deep the canon is that my first thought is to quote Emily Dickinson at you, you know, and to say, you know, after great pain, a formal feeling comes, right? and the idea that you need to impose a form in order to process a crisis. And, you know, for me, I think that finding form is more to do usually with not even the audience I want, but the work that I want the piece to do. Right. So, for example, when I'm writing an essay, it's because I know that I need the audience to understand the point more than I need them to experience the art. You know, which is, you know, like, and I think that because with a poem, I mean, I obviously, you know, I'm with you, Kathy. I think that I love reading my poems because I come from a theater background too, Esther. I wanted to be an actress, and I did a lot of theater training, and then my mom was like, "That you can't make a career in that. Do something productive." So I was like, "Okay, I'll be a poet," which is hilarious because it's like even less lucrative of a career than the stage. But all of that to say, when I'm writing a poem, I write it for the audience because otherwise I feel like it's self-indulgent in some way. I want people to experience catharsis. I want them to experience pleasure. I want to, like, you know, share a story. But I think, but then, you know, if they get lost in the words and they get lost in the rhythm of it, or enjoying the performance of it and miss some piece of the message, I don't feel like that is I'm not sorry for that loss in the same way. But there are times when, especially when you're engaging in socio-political commentary and you have like this real grievance, you know, it's really urgent to just make sure it's as orderly as possible. And so then you put the wild, I call poetry a wild thing usually. You put the wildness aside in favor of like the order of a complete sentence. I will say I just finished writing a sestina that I think does that work, but that's like the most rigorously formal thing that I've ever done in my life. I don't know if it'll ever see the light of day, but anyway, so Kathy, back to you.
I think I have sort of this similar perspectives on the essay versus a poem, and I try not to make a division between the two, and I think there have been a lot of really amazing writers, history of poets who kind of blur the boundaries. But for me, I mean, I do think there is a real distinction. I mean, you know, Baldwin said that the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that are hidden by answers, and I think that just really kind of perfectly encapsulates, you know, my own thoughts, my own goals in essay writing, which is to ask questions that are hidden by answers, or to ask questions that people that's I find society that is afraid to ask, or the status quo is afraid to ask, and to you know, to be quite frank, to cut the bullshit, you know. And you know, in certain ways, like I write an essay because I get impatient, you know. I'm just like, why aren't we talking about this, you know? Um, and, you know, but I do think that there is, you know, in the way poetry can be a narrative journey, and an essay is also a narrative journey, but the journey for me is much more interior. It's the journey of me, it's sort of thinking through a question, but rather than answering that question at the end, I just end up asking more questions. And so it's just this constant sort of diving deep and unpacking and unpacking and unpacking these issues to reach, you know, what Viet Nguyen calls a sort of narrative plenitude about race, that you don't, that I still don't see, at least in the discourse of Asian Americans. I think we have a lot to do still, even though there is a really rich history of Asian American scholars and poets and writers and so forth. There's a lot of hard work ahead because, you know, we're still being gaslit, you know. But whereas poetry, I think, is more, you know, with my last 3 books, I've always, you know, since I was in my early 20s, I've always been interested in race. You know, it wasn't like something that I wasn't late coming to it or anything. However, I think poetry is just more, I'm more of an aesthete, I'm a wordsmith. I love to, it's more about my love of language and kind of subverting the language. And, a poem, I treat the poem as a song. It's more about music. It's more about the words. It's just me indulging in form. And it's also, for me, it's always been about world building, and trying to, I've said this repeatedly in past interviews. I write poetry like a fiction writer. I'm not, it's weird because, people think, oh, poets are autobiographical, but actually I was always inventing characters, inventing worlds. And for me, for whatever reason, I can only be autobiographical via prose, but not through poetry. Because poetry is a poem is a song, and I'd rather talk if I'm talking about my life. And so those are some of the distinctions. But I don't hold fast. It's not something that I cling to.
Thank you both for that. Did you want to say something, Carolyn? I see your.
And her sentences are poems, even in the essays. I mean, that's all I could say.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, Carolyn, I'm thinking a lot about you want a Confederate monument. My body is a Confederate monument, and how you frame a distinction between rewriting history and reframing history, which I think is so, so important, where you say it's not a matter of airbrushing history, but more so about a new perspective. And I'm wondering if each of you can speak about how your work reframes histories of race, racial coalitions, or racial alliances, and what new perspectives are you privileging in the work that you're producing from the vantage point of thinking race differently?
Will you say all of that one more time so I
Yeah,
can write it?
no problem. I'm thinking about, the juxtaposition that you do in the article of reframing versus rewriting history, which are two totally distinct things. And I think even what you did in the last poem that you offered from Lucy's Negro Redux, where you're talking about Shakespeare and you're reading that poem differently. Obviously, that's a reframing. It's not a rewriting. It's the same poem, right? But it's just a different perspective. So I'm wondering if you think sort of broadly about your work and how you engage race, whether that be race sort of like mono-racially, like singular racial groups, or thinking about that across coalition or alliances, and how you're rethinking history, or at least rewriting history, or reframing, that was the wrong word, reframing history to usher in these new perspectives in the work that you're producing. I can say it again too.
I'm just thinking about, is this question to me and to Kathy?
It's both of you, yes, because I think that
something that rang a bell for you. I'm thinking about, I'm only hesitating because I think that it's, I don't know that I've ever been asked to think about how my work reframes other people's misread past beyond my own.
Oh, no. That wasn't the intent. It wasn't about other people's past. It was just about history, no matter what. Like if it's your own history and a misreading of your history, like how you're reframing that in what you're doing.
Okay, so sorry, I think I'm overthinking the question, but I think, to me, reframing the past is the business of making sure that if we're going to live in this canon framed world, that we can see ourselves not just in the present, but that we know that we were already there, living and thriving in these spaces in the times when we were not being talked about, and that we weren't educated to remember ourselves in. And so I think that to me, it's when I think about reframing the past as opposed to rewriting it or airbrushing history, what my interest is in making sure that the people, like, you know, this word representation is bandied about so frequently right now. But to me, I want to look backward and I want to see myself in Shakespeare. I want to look backward and know where I was in historical spaces and in ideological spaces that I was not invited to occupy when I was consuming that art, when I was being educated, right? And it's interesting. I watched a panel about my work that somebody else, another scholar, I had the crazy privilege of listening to somebody give a talk about my book. And then somebody else asked a question and I just sort of was a fly on the wall, but it really struck me because one of the questions is, why do we need to see ourselves in this white past? Why do we need to add ourselves to this conversation? And one of the things when I think about, you know, fracturing the canon or putting it on its side is I think about, you know, everyone's already approved of Shakespeare, like these orders of white supremacy, of like heteronormative patriarchal structures. They've already said yes to this document, right? And so to say, hi, you brought in this Trojan horse. You brought in this text that's full of everything that is dimensional and dynamic and wild and has all of this representation in it. And all I have to do is point out, all I have to do is activate all of the things that were already happening there in order to fracture the present system. That to me is like the one of the most exciting things about reframing the past in my work. And then, you know, I don't want to start on about the Confederate monuments because we've only got 34 minutes left of this conversation, and I can go on for 800 years about it. But Kathy, what do you think?
I was thinking, actually, Caroline, your New York Times article really kind of captures that question where, you know, we think of history as these monuments, these pillars, these Confederate monuments, and I just thought you really so eloquently just, you know, the way you said, no, it's my body, and the history of miscegenation that you see on my body, my skin color, and to kind of recenter yourself as a living monument of the violence of American history is just, I thought was astounding. I think that, and also what you're saying about we're sort of at this real kind of, I don't know, who knows what's going to happen after November, but after the elections, or who's going to get elected. But, you know, we are, you know, people have said that it's been a real year of reckoning, where we're no longer, and you were saying that we're no longer gaslit. This sort of white innocence is no longer innocent. And I wrote an essay about that called The End of White Innocence. And in that essay, I said how we needed to overturn this consciousness of white innocence that has been the equivalent of American consciousness, the national consciousness, which has always been white innocence. And I'm seeing that changing with everything culturally. At least culturally, it's happening, if not inner legislation. And for me, I guess, and that kind of change in consciousness is this really recognizing and really reckoning with American history of slavery, genocide, dispossession, segregation, imperialism. And so that's, I mean, that I'm part of that. I guess I'm just part of that group of people who are trying to kind of overturn that. And for me, I think I think a lot of white Americans have a really simplistic idea of race relations. I mean, I think there's some, not all, but there are some white Americans who are now just really grappling with slavery and the legacy of slavery. And I'm like, you know, the sins of the white man are really, it's it's a lot. There's a lot. There's a lot happening. And you know, for me, it's like as a writer, as a poet, I'm always trying to kind of complicate race relations, you know, and thinking like Asian American history is just, it's like marginal, beyond marginal. It's marginal, marginal, marginal. I didn't, you know, it's not taught in high schools. It's not, you have to like seek it out even in college courses. And like the Chinese immigration law, the 1965 Hart-Celler law that first allowed immigrants in, um, and because of the civil rights movement, like all of that, I didn't even learn until later. Or also the kind of Black Asian alliances in the late 60s. No one hears about that. Instead, it's yet another Vietnam War movie from the white soldier's perspective. We have yet to have a movie from a Vietnamese perspective or Vietnamese American perspective. It's just, and so for, I think, you know, and I think about it globally, I think you know, people of color or BIPOC are the majority of this world. We're the majority. Asians are the majority. I think of billions, 2 billion Chinese people, billion Indians. I mean, and yet we're like, we barely exist in this country and we're considered marginal and we're still trying to make room for our voices. And it's just, it's absurd. It's absurd that white Americans have created this kind of cultural and economic oligarchy. And I think right now we're trying to, and I'm trying to, in my own way as a writer, and I feel sometimes sort of useless as a writer. I'm like, I wish I could be more of an activist, but as a writer, and you know, we're all trying to just overturn that oligarchy. Mhm.
Before we move on, can I just, I was struck as Kathy was speaking, I was thinking about, you know, when I say reframing, rewriting, and I think what you were saying sort of threw it into clearer relief for me is this: what the urgency is to reorient the conversation away from the white gaze, right? Like, and I think it's like we just need to be allowed to look at it through I mean, whatever the history is, even if we're talking about the Civil War, can we talk about it from not the white gaze, right? That, I mean, you know, when I was talking about the monuments, why do we only talk about it from this one perspective? And why is that one perspective the American one? But I mean, that's a stupid question. We know why it's the American one. I mean, this country as it exists politically was built on, you know, subjugation, oppression, and, you know, white supremacist ideologies, right? But I think that the reframing is not in, the reframing is in finding the extant voices in the past too, right? That we're already there, and voicing the voiceless as much as it is in figuring out how we look forward. But anyway, sorry.
Oh, thank you. It's time to move on to audience questions, which is very
great.
exciting. So I invite attendees to type in your questions on the Q&A box. And let me start with the first question that I see on the list here, and I think I could fold that into one of the questions I prepared. This question has to do with how we overcome this barrier. I think it's anonymous attendee. So I think they are referring to the barriers that we've been talking about, whether it's injustice, history, different ways that we find, or gaslighting, right? There's a whole list of barriers that we're talking about. Specifically, they are referring to affirmative action and how sometimes that is framed as kind of, you know, especially the Harvard University admissions case, right? It's kind of pitted against whites and Asians versus brown and black students, and it's always been like that, right? This kind of argument that there is this kind of like the zero-sum game. If you take one set of resources, it's not available to a different ethnic group. And I want to tie this to, Kathy, your piece in the New York Times, the slur I never expected here in 2020. And that was, again, another really powerful piece I read. And you talk about how when it finally happened to you, it meaning the anti-Asian kind of incident that was very, very prevalent, especially like in April and May. And you talk about how the perpetrator was not white, but it was a Latino delivery man, right? Mm-hmm. And you say, and I was kind of waiting for your reaction, and you said you felt sad. That was the word you used. And I was, reminded again of the book, Minor Feelings. And that is a minor feeling, this kind of sadness you feel. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could also, both of you could talk about various feelings, various kind of forms of minor feelings. And sometimes I think they clash, or they're kind of set up to clash. And what do we do about that? How do we then talk about those different feelings in ways that are not clashing necessarily, not pitted against each other, but in ways that could build toward cross-racial coalition building?
Thank you for that question. It's a question that I think about a lot, right? First of all, I will say that the majority of Asian Americans support affirmative action, the majority. And I would, and it's always been that way. It's always been the majority. And, this idea that Asians don't want affirmative action is, is just, media kind of driving a wedge. And I know that, like, at least among the young Asian Americans I know are just activated, they're just to fight this. They will refuse to be played as a pawn for this. But it was, I think the racism, that anti-Asian racism that's still here, it's still happening, but that seemed to at least get to be maybe more explosive, or at least get more media attention in March and April. It wasn't like it came out of nowhere. I mean, I faced, a lot of racism when I was a kid, and, I was called a chink when I was a kid, and it persisted, but I think the way I chose to live my life made that kind of racism dormant, because I was like, I'm going to live in a city where I feel comfortable. I'm going to find my community where I don't have to explain myself. And I think that's what a lot of Asians did. They're like, who had the choice to do it and the privilege to do it, where they left the towns and the cities where they were made to feel like they belong, and they found the places where they did belong. And so that's why I had the privilege of not facing that discomfort until it came back during COVID, where suddenly I felt, I would never, someone was like, oh, it's like being a Black woman or a Black man. And I'm like, no, I wouldn't say that. It's not that kind of hypervisibility. I would say it's more like being maybe someone who's Muslim during 9/11, where suddenly you're targeted. And I think it shows you the fragility of the model minority myth, where it's like, it's good, it's there, assimilation, as I write in my book, is the privilege of assimilation is that you're invisible, that you're not going to be bothered. But that's always conditional. That's always temporary, as South Asians discovered after 9/11, and as East Asians discovered during COVID. Now, I would say that the Black-Asian relation is hard. I think I felt sad because I wasn't finding the alliance, the support among other Black and Brown Americans. I mean, but there were a lot, but sometimes I felt it was some soul searching I had to do, because, there were also a few people who were like, well, where were Asian Americans? Where were Asian Americans um, when Black people are suffering, or when Latinos are suffering? And I, and I wanted to, and of course I became defensive. Like, I've always been an ally, and I know all my Asian friends, like my friends are allies, but it's the whatever position we've been positioned in has really been debilitating and isolating as a model minority, where we're white adjacent, and therefore there's a suspicion, so we're considered suspicious, and that of course has a lot to do, and for good reason, because the LA riots is a very good example, with the Korean immigrant who killed Latasha Harlins. The fact that there were Koreans who were not willing to bridge community building when they moved their businesses into Black neighborhoods, and whatever tension there was from the LA riots have not gone away. It still continues. I was reading this one article in the New York Times about this wig shop that's owned by a Korean man, I think in Atlanta, but I could be wrong. And there's a Black female manager, and and his store burned down because it was looted. And I was thinking, and it's a very peculiar phenomenon that Koreans own businesses that sell Black wigs, and the answer to that is bigger. It's, of course, structural, it's systemic. Black people need to own their own businesses in Black communities, and we need to have that kind of financial structure to allow that. There needs to be, this is why we need reparations, so that Black people can own their own businesses. But at the same time, there's this real kind of tricky moral calculus. Like, in one hand, I'm like, I wish Asians were less anti-Black, and we have to do better to teach our, especially our parents, to be not anti-Black. But then I think Americans also don't understand that a lot of Asians too also come from a history of defeat, and that we also suffer from racism. That Korea, for instance, was, 3 million people died from the Korean War because we were pawns of Cold War of America. And I don't know. And it's like, I think really what needs to happen, and this is another way whiteness needs to be decentered, is that there needs to be real conversations, honest conversations between people of color, not only about sort of our differences, but also maybe some of our shared histories, And I think that's the thing. It's like, I think it's one or the other. And sorry, I've been talking too long. It's one or the other. It's like, it's either emphasized that we're all just a happy coalition, or which is not true, or that like our differences are irreconcilable. And any way, if you try to analogize Black suffering, it will be to dilute Black suffering. And I'm like, is there a way to acknowledge these structural, economic, historical differences while also finding some commonality between us? Or is that too confusing?
There's a way. There's got to be one. I believe in the human condition as something that fundamentally can find ways to connect across things that divide us. I think, listening to you talk, I think that one of the big questions is, how do we figure out how to abandon the desire to assimilate until we all actually agree on the terms of what we're assimilating into? Because I think that like this notion of like white adjacentness and the idea that that is a privilege of comfort and of relative safety in certain kinds of structural ways, but it's also not a lie, but it's costly. It's costly, like morally, ethically, culturally. And I think that figuring out how to divorce, people like the model minority status that is like, that gets to live in this like different way proximally to whiteness, divorcing that, or taking the not the prestige, but the allure away from that is one of the important steps. And then I think acknowledging the complexity of the fact that the peculiar condition of being a Black person in this country whose family were brought over during the slave trade, that has made it minority status that is visible through like an ethnic distinction, just a shitty, that has made being a minority in this country that visibly presents as a minority such an intense and profound second-class citizenship, just as the state of being of non-whiteness, full stop. So arriving somewhere where anybody who was other is automatically in this like sort of gruesome other category, that was set up as the infrastructure of a country that in order to build itself had to like, commit mass genocide and heinous crimes against humanity of the other colored people who were already living here in the first place. It's hard to blame people who say, well, the fact of your lives here is what's making my life harder because all of these other people who are in charge already hate all colored people. And you're the colored people that they practice their hatred on. That's complicated. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But I think we have to talk about that together, because what really is we're all just trying to figure out how to survive toxic whiteness is the, and so figuring out the reactions to that, that's what we have to figure out how to be able to do, and to do it with generosity of spirit from both sides. Because I think when you say like, Asian cultures that come from defeat too, that is so critically important for, a Black person who's experiencing racism from somebody who is Korean needs to understand where that comes from too. Because that's a real misery. Like, there's like really heinous things that have happened at the hands of Americanness abroad, that we have to navigate together. I don't know.
It's interesting. I just want to say one thing. Like, it's like, I agree. I think we need to, what we need to do is like decolonize our minds of the American dream, which I was like, it colonized my parents' minds. And it was when I was reading that article, I thought it was a very interesting article that was sympathetic to both the Black woman and the Korean man. But I was reading the comments afterwards, and they all had very different points of views, but there were quite a few people, and they were white people mostly, who were saying, look at Mr. Na, who has worked really hard, didn't even get a bank loan, borrowed from his Korean community. He worked 14 hours a day, and he made it. He managed to own his own business. He got it done. It is possible. And I was like, this is the kind of misguided thinking that gets us into trouble, that it's still inculcated in our minds. And I was like, no, that is not it. First of all, look at, people don't know about, like, how Black Americans were redlined, or were prevented from living in certain neighborhoods, or just the family structure completely being split apart since slavery, all of that. So that makes the Black American position so different than, say, the Asian immigrant position who came here voluntarily and, and yes, worked their asses off. And yes, maybe a few of them did own their own businesses, but we're also looking at this from the white gaze, as we're saying, as we're thinking, because because we always spotlight the one Asian family that does get to own their own business. We don't see all the Asian families that fail, that struggle, that deal with mental illness, that deal with all kinds of problems that is just always, no, that Asian family serves a purpose, that they were able to make it. They didn't even have to take loans from the government or from the bank, you know, they did it on their own. So it is possible. And then that's it. That's where the story ends.
That was a really robust and dynamic conversation. I think that in many ways it spoke to several of the questions that are populating right now in the Q&A that are really interested in thinking about possibilities for Black and Asian coalition, community building, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to try my best to sort of combine these questions so that we can get to as many of them as possible. There was one question that was specifically wanting to go back to Kathy, you previously speaking about Black and Asian alliances across the 1960s. A lot of those being around the power movements and also the student struggles. And the person asking this question, Irene Thomas, is interested in the erased histories of allyships and would love to hear more about this in particular, but also how to reignite those collective struggles for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Similarly, we got a question before the panel from Kristen Mullen, who was thinking about Asian or specifically Korean communities and Black community support. And the question was more so as if Korean American communities support, say for instance, a call for reparations, reciprocally, what can Black Americans support for Korean Americans to sort of have this reciprocal sort of agenda towards a kind of collective politic for supporting each community?
I could start. I'm sorry, can you just say a little bit? The first part of the question was, I was like focusing on the second part of the question. And I was like, oh wait. And the first
it was about the erased history of previous.
Yeah. It's that I think, I don't know. I mean, there were, we had Grace Lee Boggs and Yuriko Chiyama, and there were a lot of young Asian Americans who were a different demographic than the Asian Americans now. They were Filipino, Japanese, Chinese, and they came from different backgrounds. They came from working class families, and they came from working class families, and also the Vietnam War was happening. So they were seeing people who looked like them being murdered, and no one was talking about that. And so there are a lot of these activist groups that that Downer copied actually a lot, sort of the signature style of Black Panthers with the beret, and they also had their kind of their list of demands, and but they were the ones, they really kind of defined Asian American identity as a political identity, and also as an identity that is intra-racial and anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist. And that just got totally erased. And I think that had to do with Reaganomics, that had to do with like also these new generations of immigrants coming in, Asian immigrants, Koreans, Indians, Bangladeshis. A lot of them were also, I mean, there were a lot of working class immigrants, but a lot of them were also more of the professional class and who really sort of bought into the American dream. They're also refugees. So it's just like the Asian American community just got much, much bigger and much more disparate. And just and like, you know, and this is always the question, I think, among Asian Americans, how can we even build a coalition amongst ourselves? There are still Asians who are ashamed of even saying that they're Asian American, or just think that it's such a weak identity marker because it means nothing, you know? And it's like, or they would rather identify as like Cambodian or Indian rather than Asian American. Like, what is that? It's just like an empty umbrella term. So it's like, it's even a question that like Asian Americans, like, how do we even build a coalition amongst ourselves, you know? Um, but I think it's really important because I think because we've been so like inundated by just this flattening idea of the Asian successful kid, and I was like, no, this is where actually the term Asian American came from, and it came from these activists, and we have to remember that. And I think that is changing now. I do believe that. I think there are I mean, I just think the younger generation of Asian Americans, the millennials and the Gen Zers are fierce. They're fierce, and they are in the way that they support Black Lives Matter, in the way that they are anti-capitalist and are interested in civic engagement and are also interested in the arts. I mean, I'm seeing it. I'm witnessing it happening right now. I'm really hoping that it will sustain itself, that it will become something larger, and that whoever wins this election, say if it was Biden, that it will not quell any of this anger and this activism, that it will only get bigger, you know, because that allianceship is important. I think it's also, let me just say this, and maybe this is just academics or something, but in like critical race, among critical race scholars, there are also some people who are very suspicious of allianceships, you know, or, and I don't know. I just feel like we don't have a choice right now. That's just how I feel. So, Caroline.
One, I'm delighted to model, dear people who don't like to acknowledge they're wrong. I'm delighted to acknowledge ignorance to a thing. I don't think it's weak of me to say that I didn't know about these Black Asian alliances of the 60s and 70s.
No one knows.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think what's complicated, and I'm interested by this idea of the notion of a named Asian American identity as a sign of weakness. And I think that it's and it kind of gets at one of the tensions in trying to forge the alliance that I think is necessary. Because I think that the notion of an African American identity is one that's born of a necessity that was totally involuntary. Like until you could take an ancestry DNA test, you had to be of your whole continent because you didn't know what country you came from. So our sort of independent national identities were robbed from us. And I think that complicates the conversation. One, the voluntary versus involuntary choice to be here in the first place complicates it. And then two, the sense of an identity, like the fact that we come from anywhere in Africa and our American, like our Americanness is the part of us that is African is rooted in the fundamental structure of America. They had to get slaves here to build the country in the first place. So our Africanness is actually fundamentally also American. Mm-hmm. America doesn't exist without African Americans. In a like we couldn't have built the buildings or tilled the land to like get the food to make the thing. And I think that the question of there's no country to retreat to for your identity if you're a black person whose family were enslaved here. This is all we got because any other distant any other national identity was robbed from us in the Middle Passage. And I think and I think acknowledging that maybe would make it easier to then navigate it, right? I think that just making that distinction, because I think that sometimes, like, when you're trying to make an alliance, you say, well, we're all just minorities together, and now we're dealing with this direction. But I think acknowledging the functional differences of how and why we're existing in this space differently would actually be fruitful, because we can learn from both sides of it, and then also come together to like heal one another, because our wounds aren't in the same places. And I think that's helpful. It's like, I might be missing an arm but got two legs. You might be missing a leg but got two arms. It's like, together we got all, like, we have enough limbs to get by. Like, I think that there's something about acknowledging the differences of the wounds that actually makes it easier to connect. Yeah.
I love that, acknowledging the differences of the wounds. Yeah.
Oh, I feel like we're just getting started. It's 8:30. Oh my gosh, this is such a rich conversation. We obviously have to continue this. And when things are back to normal, whenever that is, we would love to have you guys come to our campus and have an actual live session and continue the conversation. Thank you so much for all your answers, generosity, sharing your views and stories. I'm gonna turn it over to Amy. Back to Amy now.
Wow, I do not want this to end. So moved. Oh my goodness. This is why, yes, we, again, what Esther said, this is just the beginning of the conversation, how little we know of one another and how so much we have in common. As an institution of higher education that Duke is, we have a responsibility to take this ball with us and really educate ourselves and our students and blow out the histories that we have all inherited and learned, right? I myself, as a professor here, basically am doing a DIY, teaching myself the history that I can teach my students the next day. This is just the beginning again. I was going to just spend a few moments just thanking the staff, the incredible staff who've made this possible, from the Center for International and Global Studies, Alex Nickley and Xiaojun Ping, amazing. Until the very last second, we were working on this. And somebody talked about the fierceness of the Gen X and millennials. These are our students who have also been on staff, making it possible for the Asian American and diaspora studies. Derek Uejo and Shania Ku especially, but there are others. I also want to give a shout out to Esther and Patrice and another collaborator who wasn't able to join us, Jane Ifekwanigwa of the Center for Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. This was really a partnership in crime together. And so from the outset, it's been a learning experience as we've learned to collaborate with each other and build this coalition. And Patrice especially deserves the special thanks at a very difficult time in her life. And for her to show up like this in Alliance, I am just so moved. And finally, I just want to say, if those of you who are local, go to the Nasher. There's a partner event on the arts of the pandemic, Resist COVID, Take 8. It's an outdoor exhibit. So take your family, just hang out in the grounds and just let us think about how the arts and the humanities and the university can come together to continue to work on these coalition building. But there's a mountain of questions. You have really inspired so many of our students and audience members. So again, just the beginning. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Farewell and vote.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bull City born bred, cornbread fed. I'm Bull City born bred, cornbread.
It's the North Cat, baby, I'm a boss. Carolina barbecue sauce with the slaw. I'm the safe, the cellar, and the vault. I'm the best, the effect, and the cause. I'm the law. It's the North Cat, baby, I'm a boss. Carolina barbecue sauce with the slaw. I'm the safe, the cellar, and the vault. I'm the best, the effect, and the cause, I'm the lie. I'm the truth, man, you looking real false. Whenever I hit the booth, I come out to an applause. If I'm talking to my crew, you heard a southern drawl. Yo, I ain't talking to you, stop eavesdropping the ball. I be rocking with y'all, I be off of the wall. A pit bull off the leash, I keep locking my jaws. I see a cop at the mall, I see a cop at the fault. Peter picking a fight, I can see the Viking in y'all. One of my punchlines are where your Vicodin off. I know I'm frightening y'all long as a mic is involved. Relocated to Cali, but I ain't liking the smog. I'm a Southern North Star, I be the light in the dark. Be the right and the wrong, I be the reason the Bull City feeds me. Bull City greets me, Bull City needs me. Everywhere I go, I got that Bull City greeting. That's why they throw the horns when the Bull City sees me. It's the North Cat, baby, I'm a boss. Carolina barbecue sauce with the slaw. I'm the safe, the cellar, and the vault. I'm the best, the effect, and the cause, I'm the law. It's the North Cat, baby, I'm a boss. Carolina barbecue sauce with the slaw. I'm the safe, the cellar, and the vault. I'm the best, the effect, and the cause, I'm the law.
Still the greatest rapper breathing, who you think it was? J Gun is better than whoever you be bringing up. All this motherfucking singing, I don't feel it, bruh. And it's fuck 12 till they stop killing us. Look, we Yamazawa with rhyming prowess. The town is ours, we body cowards and cover graves with my mama's flowers. Off a flight from Osaka, should check the mileage. Find me at Yamazushi, I toast with the finest sake. I promise you don't want problems, you be nothing to handle. You should know I'm from Durham, that means there's nothing I can't do. Since 13, I've been punishing samples. Rappers flip-flop quick like they running in sandals, You a witness in the one, motherfucker. Heavy in my Uzi, weigh a ton, motherfucker. I ain't Petey Pie, but I walk inside the spot like, who am I? J Gun, motherfucker.
It's the North Cat, baby, I'm a boss. Carolina barbecue sauce with the slaw. I'm the safe, the cellar, and the vault. I'm the best, the effect, and the cause, I'm the law. It's the North Cat, baby, I'm a boss. Carolina barbecue sauce with the slaw. I'm the safe, the cellar, and the vault. I'm the best, the effect, and the cause, I'm the law.
New South staple, baby, collard green music. Old South hater, ain't no Paula Deen views here. Keep my collar clean when the drama seems foolish. Pop a couple drama mean, I'ma keep it moving. Gone, took another red eye back home. Shindig with my Jedi, relax the backbone. Got the sweet tea sleeping and my team keep eating. Picking all the rabbits, let's be deep in. Hog tied, hit a beat, going to a swan dive. Teach you how to float like a lotus to a bonsai. Flow across the motor, and that's my modus operandi. Sting like a queen that showed up on the pawn side. Like a cipher of circles and chainsaw. Out of town is serious who say that we can't talk. Offer my apologies said with a slight drawl, and I'm using my apostrophes, homie, we ain't y'all.
It's the North Cat, baby, I'm a boss. Carolina barbecue sauce with the slaw. I'm the safe, the cellar, and the vault. I'm the best, the effect, and the cause, I'm the law. It's the North Cat, baby, I'm a boss. Carolina barbecue sauce with the slaw. I'm the safe, the cellar, and the vault. I'm the best, the effect, and the cause, I'm the law.
It's the North Cat, baby, I'm a boss. Carolina barbecue sauce with the slaw. It's the North Cat, baby, I'm a boss.